You're watching the NCWLIFE channel. I'm Jefferson Robbins. One person has been in charge of the Chelan County Sheriff's Office for about the last dozen years. Right now, a rank-and-file deputy would like to change that. I'm joined by Mike Morrison, who's running as a Republican for Chelan County Sheriff. Mike, thanks a lot for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I'd like you to start by telling us a little bit about yourself. You've been with this Sheriff's Office for about 8 years, but your experience goes back a little further than that, so tell us about yourself.
Correct. Giving you a brief overview. So I'm 42 years old. I know a lot look at me and say you look like you're 32, but nope, I am 42, married, have 3 kids. I've been in law enforcement since January 2006, started my career with Omak Police Department and worked there until 2014 when my wife was offered a job opportunity down here in Chelan County. Wanted to support her like she supported me in my career. So we transitioned down, came on. During that time, I've been a member of the SWAT team, high angle rope rescue, swift water rescue, search and rescue. Been a school resource officer, a field training officer. I'm a driving instructor. I know a lot of people have heard the term EVOC thrown out during a lot of our Q&As. So EVOC just means emergency vehicle operations. I run the program here locally, and I've also trained over at the State Academy, Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission. I've trained basic level academy and also the advanced course. Currently the association president. Out of my 16 plus years in law enforcement so far, January will be 17 years for me. I've spent about 10 years of those doing labor related tasks. So a lot of experience came up, and that's my background to just Central Washington University is where I graduated from with my bachelor's degree, and Spokane Community College with an associate's degree in administration of justice.
You mentioned you're president of the association. That's the Chelan County Deputy Sheriff's Association, the union that represents the commissioned deputies.
Correct.
Okay. One of the things that you've brought up in past public forums, past campaign appearances, is that there's been turnover in the Chelan County Sheriff's Office. I believe you gave the number of 46 people having left the office in about the last 8 years. Isn't turnover very high right now for all law enforcement agencies? You know, how do we attribute this to the economy, the pandemic, or to administration difficulties?
So turnover is big in some agencies, like a Seattle PD, LAPD, Chicago. You start seeing these agencies that have huge crime issues. Not so much with agencies that have desirable locations to live, like Chelan County. It is not the norm. So I have presented the number of 46 since I've been here, 2014 to now. And my opponent last night in our Q&A actually said 56 people have departed. So it's more. I'm not sure if he's referencing from when he started his term as sheriff in 2010, but not a typical turnover. Talking with other agencies, you look at East Wenatchee PD, Wenatchee, Douglas County. This is a desirable place. We have officers from King County Sheriff's Office, Seattle PD, other agencies in the West Side that were wanting to leave that environment that is not pro-law enforcement, has not been supportive, and overall is just being run by criminals. So they are coming over here for a better quality of life. It would make no sense whatsoever why we're having the amount of employees leaving that we have. And in our exit interviews that we've conducted with our officers leaving, that would be sergeants, deputies, records personnel, they've cited a major issue within Chelan County Sheriff's Office culturally that has been bullying, harassment, intimidation, and it's just been an environment that they didn't want to stay with. So you've seen a lot of our officers transferring over to agencies locally. You've seen a lot of other officers that are more tenured here with our agency, that have had experience, connection with the community, leaving to other state agencies doing the same job that they were doing here at another area. I just don't understand why we'd be losing that kind of experience and not trying to retain them. You're now seeing Link here locally is doing recruitment bonuses along with retention bonuses. You're seeing agencies across the state that are starting to implement retention bonuses. We need to get back to figuring out how do we keep our employees here. 56, if that's the figure from 2010 to now, is high. 46 between 2014 and now is high. It's more than half our agency, no matter how you look at it.
Well, you mentioned the questions about the culture within Chelan County Sheriff's Office, and some of that is supported by internal surveys of officers. And Dominic Bonney, who's an independent journalist, has reported on some of this. These surveys were very critical of the administration's handling. He's also reported on instances of harassment and abusive languages between deputies,
yes,
and not just deputies, but supervisors toward deputies. So these are big issues of interpersonal relationships and, frankly, police behaving badly toward each other disrespectfully, which could give the public pause as to how much does the police force of Chelan County respect me as a private citizen. So if you're elected to sheriff, how do you cure those issues which are interpersonal and apparently run pretty deep among the people who are still there?
Well, I'd add that this support for this kind of behavior has also been documented in court cases that have come out against us. Washington State Public Employees Relations Committee has also ruled against us for similar behavior. Our county administrator, who's currently the, intern HR director, also wrote an email here that was CC'd to our sheriff back in February of 2022 saying there was clear evidence showing that we had hostility, bullying, behaviors going on within our agency, and that they were actually going to assign an HR specialist to deal with this. We should have been dealing with this from the moment it was brought to our attention. We as the association brought up that you have individuals within our agency making aegis-related comments, making comments based off political affiliations, and the response that we've gotten back from our administration, there's nothing we can do to control what these employees say. That is irresponsible. I mean, these actions, these behaviors, these words are costing taxpayers millions of dollars. So we cannot trust one another. How can the community trust us? I agree. Number one, I mean, we can't even treat each other with respect. The citizens really expect that we're going to treat them. We have to address the issues within. I would not have allowed it to have gotten this far. The first time that we were sued and this kind of behavior was brought up, we should have had some kind of action plan already in place to deal with it. And now we're coming up to a third one, and we're still dealing with the same issues. I brought it up last night in our Q&A that when we talk about our behavioral health unit, and one of the first deputies that was really interested in this and wanted to push for it said, I want to be part of this. What can I do to bring this program here to Chelan County? You had his own supervisors telling him that if you want to be a social worker, get out of law enforcement. And that's accepted, and that's approved by our administration. They will not address this. They won't talk about it. You need an agency that has an administrator that is going to lead, take responsibility for their officers' actions, and deal with behavior that's not appropriate. So this should not have continued this long, and that's why I'm running. I want to make sure that that is taken care of. It does not cost the taxpayers any more money.
You're a union president. Police unions are among the strongest unions in America today. When officers are found to have misbehaved in some way, often they are protected by collective bargaining agreements. Your agency has a collective bargaining agreement with the union that you represent, that you preside over. Does the union have some responsibility to take a step forward and say, we would agree to different language in our agreements, different language in our contracts that lets deputies be disciplined for this kind of stepping out of line? If it's not a human resources problem, could it be a case where simple disrespect is subject to discipline? Some of these instances I'm thinking of are abusive text threads amongst deputies that have been reported.
Yes.
Should the union advocate for stronger language that says, hey, if you speak disrespectfully to your peers, you can be sanctioned for it?
I would agree with that. So there have been instances where I have, as an instructor, had to sit in with deputies who have done things that were not correct or needed to be adjusted. And I've sat in with them and we provided that training to say, hey, this is how we're correcting the behavior. And I've also let them know that we are documenting these instances to show that we have focused on your behavior. We've given you solutions how to correct it. And that if you don't correct it, this could eventually lead to a point where you could be terminated. And it's called progressive discipline. We're making efforts to address behaviors that are unacceptable and showing them ways of acting appropriately or conducting themselves appropriately. And it's the same thing we've done as an association. I've done as a field training officer that I've sat in with, unfortunately, deputies that did not make the cut here. And we just had to tell them the facts were that you're probably not going to be a law enforcement officer. But we have done what we're supposed to do as an agency to cover ourselves, give them the opportunities to be successful. And if they can't, then that's a justifiable termination. Unfortunately, I've had a couple people that I've worked with throughout my career that did actions that were not appropriate, and they're no longer in law enforcement, which is the way it should be. So we are held to a higher standard. We are pillars of our community. We should be held to that standard. So I do believe that deputies should be held accountable for their actions, but there's also an appropriate way that we at least give them the opportunity to correct that behavior, be aware that it's happening, and follow our own standards and procedures that are in our policy manual to say, if we do have issues, this is how we get to this point where if this person no longer needs to be a law enforcement officer, you at least have justification and backing to show that once you got to a point of termination, you're backed and you can support yourself. We have not done that in our agency. We have gone from 0 to termination, and it's bit us several times now. I mean, we've seen the most recent one here was in November of 2021. I believe it was an article that you wrote where we paid out $425,000 because we did not follow the steps. So the reason that the association is in place is for better working conditions, wages, and benefits, and to also protect the employee if it's I guess I would call it tyrannical leadership coming back towards them, trying to discipline them on personal vendettas and not just the facts. So there are deputies and officers that do not belong behind a car or behind the steering wheel wearing the badge, and we have no problem showing those officers and those deputies the door out. But we will do what anyone else would do. They're paying their dues, that we provide them a vigorous defense, and we make sure that we present the facts and that it goes to a third party that is not associated with the association or the agency to hear and determine, is it justified to discipline them or let them go? But they do deserve the same rights as anyone else. We can't strike as an agency, because if we had a complaint and we just said, hey, we're not going to show up to work, what kind of service does that do for the community? So that is why a collective bargaining agreement is in place, is that we understand we still need to show up, do our work, even if we have issues with how things are going.